Alright, it's that time once again to talk about another classic Universal horror monster. And today we're talking about one of my favorite ones as we go back to 1941 for the Wolfman. Directed by Joe Waggner and written by Crosby Critic, this film stars people like Chaney Jr., Claude Rains, Evelyn Ankers, Bela Lugosi, and many more. And before we get too far into this video, I want to say a big thanks to the guest who's joining me in this video, and that is my buddy Trey of the channel The Crosby Critic. As usual, you guys can find the link to any of my guests down below in the description box, so go give Trey some love and let him know I sent you. We're going to be hearing his thoughts on this 1941 classic in just a moment, but again, you guys can find the link to his channel down below. He's got a great channel over there where he talks about a lot of movies, most notably a lot of modern day animation, and just a lot of really cool modern day pop culture stuff. He's got a really great way of editing his videos. I really enjoy his content. He's grown a lot in the time that I've gotten to know him, and I highly recommend going and checking out his video. But again, we'll be hearing from him in a second, as today we're talking about 1941's The Wolfman. Now, if you guys have been following the channel for a while, you know that I already covered the 2010 remake starring Benicio del Toro. That's a film that I actually love that a lot of people do not love, and I think part of it is because of this film. I've mentioned it time and time again, but my origins of film when it comes to loving it came down to really just sitting down in front of the TV as a kid watching a lot of horror classics that would play on repeat around the time of October. And what a better time to talk about the Wolfman than in October. And so in the case of the Wolfman, it was always a character just visually that I found myself the most enticed by, as I've always been a huge fan of werewolves. When it comes down to the debate whether you should like vampires or werewolves have always been in the direction that I've leaned into, though vampires tend to have the better movies for the most part. And when it comes down to the Wolfman, when it comes down to all of the classic horror monsters that Universal put out over the years, the Wolfman's imagery and Lon Chaney Jr. in that makeup is without a doubt one of the most iconic things to me, and I've always just been a huge fan of the look and feel of this character. But like a lot of these movies in the modern day where we have so many other movies that we're watching, it's been some time since I had gone back and watched this movie, so I was very happy to go back and revisit it. Now the question is, what do I think about it today? Now, while I don't think this is one of the better written, better acted films across all of the Universal horror monster movies, I do think it still has a lot of great moments and a lot of great elements when it comes to filmmaking that without a doubt definitely pique my interest every time that I watch this film. And going back and revisiting it, I still had a lot of fun with this movie. But like a lot of these movies, there's definitely some things you can go back to, poke fun at, some things that don't hold up all too well, some lines of dialogue that are laughable, and some moments of character choices that are very much of the time. We most notably focus on a man named Lawrence Talbot here, played by Lon Chaney Jr., who will appear over the course of these films. His father in this film is played by Claude Rains, who you may remember from The Invisible Man that I recently covered as well with my buddy Blacktastic Media. The Universal horror monster movies of this time, and a lot of movies in general, even if they're in the same continuity, often use the same actors for sequels because there were no DVDs, Blu-rays, or even VHS. There was no way for audiences to watch these movies again at home and prepare themselves for the next movie. So it was one of those situations where they just kind of hoped that you would forget about it. But in the modern day where we can just do a marathon of these movies, it is often funny to see the same actors playing various roles, a lot of times within the same continuity, a lot of times even them playing different characters in a movie that once featured a character that they played. It's really interesting. And one of the most notable ones here is Claude Rains, of course, who played the Invisible Man, you know, less than a decade prior to the release of this film, and of course is now in this film as a completely different character. And you also have Bela Lugosi, the classic actor who brought Dracula to the screen in 1931's Dracula, who is in this film as well as actually the original werewolf that actually bites Lawrence Talbot in this movie. And of course, like all of these other Universal horror monster movies, you have a, kind of forced in there romance that feels usually undercooked. But I would argue that this one definitely has one of the better romances when it comes to these films compared to some that I oftentimes tend to find just kind of tacked on and something that just felt like a necessity of the time. So what is The Wolfman all about? Well, it focuses, like I mentioned, on Lawrence Talbot, played by Lon Chaney Jr., who is, this kind of suave, charming dude who is also equally just kind of creepy. The first time he actually goes and speaks to the woman that he is kind of getting into a romantic affair with in this film, he pretty much went over there initially because he was a peeping Tom and was checking her out through the window. And it's supposed to come off in this incredibly charming way, and in a modern sense is incredibly creepy and off-putting when it comes to his character, but it's sometimes part of the both laughable yet also charming part of films of this era. Not too long into the film, him and Gwen, the woman that he has taken some interest in, decide to go with a friend of theirs named Jenny to go and get their fortune told. Except when they get there, Bela Lugosi, the fortune teller of this situation, is a little bit frightened, but they don't know exactly why. Well, it turns out that he has seen the fortune of Jenny, the girl that goes with them, and that she's going to be killed by a werewolf, but he himself is a werewolf, so he knows he's the one that's going to do it. So after telling her to run for her life, he ends up unfortunately still turning into a werewolf, and the fortune comes true as he kills Jenny. And amidst that attack from this werewolf to Jenny, Bela Lugosi towards Jenny, you have Lon Chaney Jr.'s Lawrence Talbot going to try and fight off this wolf, only to discover that the wolf is no longer there and there's just a man now once he's killed this individual, but he was bit by this wolf that he saw, even though nobody else saw this wolf. So now some are accusing him of murdering this fortune teller played by Bela Lugosi, while he's trying to explain that he was bit, except the bite has disappeared. The bite mark has disappeared and there is no scarring. And of course, as you would expect, this eventually leads to him becoming the Wolfman. Now, there's a couple more things I want to talk about on the back end of this review, some things I didn't like so much and some things I enjoyed as well. But before we get into that, I want to go ahead and pass it on over to my buddy Trey from the Crosby Critic, and we'll get back to my thoughts in just a moment.
Thanks for having me again, Anthony. It's a shame we're not talking about Captain America 1990 again, the film that won the Oscar for Best Editing. But it's spooky month, and I'm here to talk about The Wolfman. The real scary thing about this movie is it's in black and white. Now, that may turn some people away, but remember that black and white movies are some of the best movies ever made. My personal favorite is King Kong. Now, would I consider The Wolfman one of the best black and white movies I've ever seen? Well, I mean, it's definitely the best Wolfman movie that never shows a full moon in any of its scenes. The Wolfman actually has a lot going for it, especially when it comes to set design. The fog in the eerie dark woods really adds to the fact that this is a classic looking horror movie. While there's not a lot you can do with trees, the way the woods look in this movie is creepy in many places. That's definitely iconic in terms of how monster movies go. The woods isn't the only set though. We got a mansion looking place, a shop, a real nice looking church. Every new location feels like a character in its own right, making this entire setting feel truly realized. The story is very good in the middle segment. The beginning and the ending are nothing to howl to the moon about in my personal opinion. The middle though is very stellar. That's when we get all the different sets, the wolf transformation, and when he turns into the Wolfman himself, which I will get into a bit later. Lon Chaney Jr. is our titular character and he is extremely charming. He's always doing the right thing, whether it's saving someone from being attacked from a creature, trying to protect himself knowing he can transform and kill people, or looking at a girl through the window with a telescope. And then after she rejects him, he keeps persisting 5 million times. But it was 1941, you know? If bread was 8 cents, then I guess that's allowed. Anything goes back in the black and white days. Despite those flaws, he actually is a pretty swell guy. And you genuinely feel bad for the fella at the end of the movie, and even when he is the Wolfman, as he's pleading for people to stay away from him because he could become a hairy beast at any moment and start gnashing at people close to him. It's kinda sad. Earlier I mentioned how I thought the beginning and the ending kinda sucked, but the middle is stellar. Now usually movies nowadays are an hour and 40 minutes to 2 hours long, and then you got some now that are 3 hours long. Wolfman is a whopping long ass 1 hour and 9 minutes. In other words, it's a nice sexy 69. I'm sorry, Anthony, I had to make that joke. Please don't kick me off the channel. This means that while the beginning is somewhat slow, I can forgive it because it's only the first 15 minutes of the movie that's like that, and 70% of the runtime is in the middle, but the ending is so abrupt that it whiplashed me. It was not quite my tempo. The final thing I want to talk about is what everyone will be waiting for when watching the movie, the Wolfman itself. Here he comes now. Now, you may think he looks goofy, and by today's standard, yes, he does. But when watching this, you have to mentally tell yourself that you were born in 1937, back when Hershey bars were 5 cents, and this is the first horror movie you're ever going to see. And then instantly, you'll appreciate the hard work and effort that went into designing the Wolfman. I really love the dissolved transitions as his hair gets hairier and hairier, and just entangled with each other. And while that's happening, the feet gets larger, and the toes bigger. Apparently in the original draft, the Wolfman was never going to be shown, and thank God we actually get to admire and appreciate the makeup and the effort the crew did to bring the Wolfman to life. The Wolfman may not be a perfect movie, and I may not love it, but the acting, solid writing, and the eerie score and set locations causes the Wolfman to have a lot more good than it does bad. Despite my score, it does deserve to be held as a classic monster flick. Anthony, thanks again for having me, man. If you're from my channel and you migrated over to this one, subscribe to my boy. He goes really in depth with his movie reviews and other things. I'll catch you next time, and remember that houses like this only cost $6,900 in 1941.
A big thanks to Trey for joining me here in this video. Always a pleasure to have you on. If you guys have not already checked it out, we did a review, as he mentioned, for the Captain America 1990 film, which was fucking terrible. There's no getting around it. And today we're definitely talking about a far better film with a far better legacy. Loved hearing your take on the film, and I honestly didn't know what Trey would think about this movie when I invited him to join me, because it is such an older film, and I know it's not necessarily within his wheelhouse of films to cover. But I loved hearing your thoughts, man. Really loved the way you edited your portion as well, and I definitely want to just kind of use this moment to say, guys, go and check out Trey's channel. You guys can find the link to his channel down below in the description box. Go give him some love and let him know I sent you. Definitely looking forward to having him on the channel very soon once again. But let's go ahead and wrap up my thoughts now. Something I wanted to mention on the earlier part, but I wanted to Trey to say it as well, and then talk about it here, is the element of the set design. I think that one of the coolest things about these older films a lot of times is the illusion that we're in these places that we necessarily shouldn't be or can't be. And these sound stages that they would use back in the day that Universal was well known for were without a doubt some of the most impressive things when it came to filmmaking in this era. Whether it be the fake forest that has all the fog across the floor, or the town that they're spending time in throughout the course of the film, this film for the most part has really great set design and locations used that ultimately add to the eerie tone of the film. And like all of these older films, of course there are going to be some slower elements to this film, and revisiting it, there was definitely that element from time to time where I was a little bit bored from time to time, and there was just some dialogue and some sequences that felt like they didn't necessarily have to be there, even though this film only clocks in at, as Trey said, 69 minutes. But yeah, you know, overall I found it to be a breeze of a watch that ultimately has a lot of great costume design and set design, and the most notable thing of course being the makeup that Lon Chaney Jr. was pretty notably not a fan of, but obviously he went through a lot of really hardcore makeup that was definitely different when it came to prosthetic makeup back then, to really give us an iconic look. The look of the werewolf in this film, though cheesy in moments, ultimately still really holds up, and for a film that has a lot of dated elements as you're watching it, it's undeniable that the makeup used to bring Lon Chaney Jr. to life as the Wolfman is a standout of this film, and it still holds up to this day. There are such cool moments in this film in terms of the look of the Wolfman that just looks great because it was caught on camera. And while I'm a huge fan of a lot of CGI and what it can do and how some of the CGI looks great in the 2010 Wolfman, I think when you look at the prosthetic work from the newer one versus that original film, they both still look really good for their personal eras, and I just really love all the hard work that went into the aesthetic of this film, with Lon Chaney Jr. definitely being a standout in that makeup to really bring it to life. Overall, The Wolfman is a fairly simplistic narrative with a tacked on romance and some great practical effects and stuff like that, but ultimately is a just wonder of filmmaking of its time. It could be a little bit boring, I think, to some today, and there are some boring moments, but again, it is a film from 1941, but ultimately genuinely, I still found it to be a good time, whether it be for the cool, fun stuff that still works or the really cheesy, not so fun stuff that is just kind of laughable at times. For whatever reason, this film is kind of entertaining on different levels. And yeah, it was just a lot of fun to go back and revisit. So that's going to be our thoughts on The Wolfman. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's been a lot of fun covering some horror films over the course of October. Of course, I always talk about horror here on the channel, but it's nice to have a month where it kind of feels specific when it comes down to horror. Again, I want to say a big thanks to my buddy Trey from the Crosby Critic. You guys can find the link to his channel down below in the description box. So go give him some love. Let him know I sent you. What are you still doing here? Just kidding. Stick around till the video is over because it will help the channel out. But honestly, genuinely, guys, I really appreciate you guys for watching. I hope you guys have been enjoying the content this month. We're coming to a close on the October season, and there are still some horror movies that I plan to do. So there will be probably some rollover in terms of a couple of movies that I didn't get to cover in this month that I'm going to be doing in the earlier part of November as we get closer to Christmas, and then I'll try to throw in some Christmas movies. Whatever the case may be, though, I appreciate all you guys for watching. I appreciate all you guys for liking, commenting, and subscribing. And again, go give Trey some love. We'll see you guys in the next one, all right? Bye-bye.